Hi guys, my name's Ian Neil. Welcome to the Saturday night study group. What we're going to look at today, we're going to look at network security. So what I've got is I've got a diagram here of three network areas. The first one is known as a wide area network, and this is untrusted. And we would normally have an internet web server sitting out here. And then we've got DMZ, which is a screen subnet. This is a boundary layer that the company owns. We have this layer so we can allow untrusted devices to connect. What we've then got is our local area network, which is trusted. And inside that network, we're going to have things like domain controllers and SQL servers, because the SQL server has got the credit card. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to run through the devices that are on our network. We're going to start off with the router. The router joins networks together. And then we're going to go through IPS and IDS, jump server, proxy, reverse proxy, load balancer, and sensor. And then I'm going to come in and look at a switch, because I've covered the rest of the devices in here. The main thing when you're looking at these devices, you just need to know what's the function of the device and where would I place it on my network. And I'm going to answer all these questions when I start doing my whiteboards. If I look at a router and a firewall, they have got a thing called an access control list. And when you install them, there's only the last rule, deny all. So what happens is when you put the firewall or router up and you're taking it from the box, everything's blocked. You've then got to allow rules to let the traffic come through. So I've got 4 allow rules here, and I want to download a Kindle, and it's using FTP. You can see from the allow rules, there is no rule for it. So that is actually, so what happens is FTP, because there's no allow rule, he goes down the bottom and he gets the deny rule. When he gets this deny rule, it's now called implicit deny. These are explicit allow rules because I put them in. The implicit deny rule means because there's no allow rule, we get the last rule, which is deny all. So what I'm going to do now, I'm now going to go in and start doing things like the intrusion prevention system and intrusion detection system as well. So let's go and have a look. So I'll get my network up, and I'm only going to work with one firewall. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to stick a firewall in here. Oh, that's a bit heavy. I don't normally have it that heavy. Let's see if it'll look a bit lighter. That's better. We'll try that again. I don't know why the pen was that heavy. But here is your firewall. And if you look at the last session we had on firewalls, it controls traffic. And then we have here the wide area network. And coming into the wide area network, we've got the network traffic. Now, the first device I'm going to look for is called an intrusion prevention system. And just like his name, he's trying to protect your network. Well, when I teach this, I take the prevention out and I make it a protection system. It's still got the same abbreviation, IPS. And I've got a chap that runs up and down my network, and his name is John Wick. John Wick is the network enforcer, and he's got a great big gun, and he's going to shoot all the bad guys that come into my network. Now, where should I place my IPS? I need to place my IPS right up here onto my firewall, because what we want to do, we want the IPS to search the traffic. Now, when the IPS is in inline mode, that means that the traffic flows through. And what the IPS can do, he can search the traffic for traffic that we don't want. So the traffic flows through, and that is the job of the IPS, is to protect my network. If you see one that starts with an N, like NIPS, he does the network. And if I've got one that starts with an H, an HIPS, he does the computer. Now, the network-based IPS can only do the network, but not the host. And the host-based IPS, he can only do the host and not the network. But there's something that you should also know about it, and it's not commonly known. If I put him on monitoring mode, he can do the same job as the intrusion detection system. But the intrusion detection system, he cannot do the protection that John Wick is actually doing. So when you've got questions in the exam and you've got malware or attackers running through your network, the person you're going to put in there to protect that part of the network is going to be your intrusion prevention system, your IPS. I'm going to put my IPS right up next to the firewall, so when all the traffic is coming from the internet, he's protecting it. Any questions, guys? Right. So we'll go from the IPS and we'll go on to an IDS. So I'll clear this screen and I'll just have my network. And I've got up here intrusion, and he is the detection system. And when I teach this in my classes, my IDS is going to be the best detective in the world. It's going to be Sherlock Holmes. So I've got Sherlock Holmes looking at my network. Now, he is known as passive because he doesn't attack anyone. But what his job is, he uses devices called sensors and collectors, because what he can do, he can see if there's new hosts or patterns on your network. Now, one thing you need to know, what does he have? He has information which is called user behavior analytics. So he knows about all the patterns. So for instance, if I've got a finance server and I've got a guy called Joe, and Joe doesn't work in finance, and he's trying to break into the server, the IDS will detect it. He knows what the normal patterns are, and if things are outside the pattern, then the intrusion detection system is going to alert the security operations center of this. So basically, we've got two devices we've seen so far. The IPS protects the network, and the IDS detects unusual patterns on the network. He may then tell the IPS, look, we need to stop this attack, or he'll tell the Security Operations Center. Now, something that's becoming more useful, and it's a new topic inside 701, is a thing that's known as a jump server. People call them jump servers. They call them jump boxes. So here's my firewall. Here's my DMZ. Here's my LAN. And inside my LAN, I've got subnet 1 and I've got subnet 2. And over here, I've got an administrator, and the administrator is at home, and he's actually got no VPN. But this administrator needs to do some admin tasks on these networks. So they put something called a jump server in each of these networks. And what happens with the jump server, these are to allow admin access. So if the administrator is called AIM and he wants to do some work on the DMZ, he'll remote into this server here. If he needs to go to subnet 2, he'll go in through that server there. So the jump server allows him to come in to areas of the network. So when you're in the CompTIA exam and you want to keep things separate from the users, but yet you want administrators to get to these separate networks, you'll use a jump server for the administrator to come in. Now, another thing we're going to use to protect our network is going to be called a proxy server. Now, what you've got is you've got a proxy server, and this proxy server is looking at the traffic that's in, and its destination is going out. And sometimes what you'll do in the proxy server, you'll cache web pages. So when I was an IT manager and we had people coming in on Monday morning, especially men, they've been out drinking all weekend and they want to look at the sports results to make sure which teams have won. I used to cache these so that they could actually get to them. Because with the proxy server, any web pages in the cache, it stops you having to go through your firewall and come back again. The only problem with the cache and the proxy, it's got to be data that doesn't change too often. So if it's sports results, you could cache it at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be the same for a day. But if it was at stock exchange, you could never cache the stock exchange because the movement is far too fast. Now, in the 701 exam, they don't focus on the web pages, they focus on the two filters. And the first thing it does, let's do this a different color. It does a thing called a URL filter. And I've got a block page. And if I go www.nfl.com, and I've got Fred over here, and he types in his browser www.nfl.com, NFL.com, when he goes through the proxy knows that's banned, so he won't get through. And the other filter we've got is known as a content filter. Now, with the content filter, we've got keywords. I might have gambling down here. I don't want them going to any gambling websites. So what we're looking at the target web server. We're looking at where is this person going. And over here, we've got a website that somebody's trying to go to, and it's called 888 Poker. So we've got Ian over here, and he wants to go to the poker site. The content filter sees that it's actually gambling, and that one is actually blocked. So if we go over the two filters once again, the URL filter blocks certain URLs that you put in the default block page. The content filter filters out content for the target website. So if you put gambling down, you're not allowed to go to any gambling websites. You won't be able to do the lottery or things like that. And what you've got here, this is sometimes known as the forward proxy. Now, what you got to think to yourself, if I'm in my car and I've got it into drive, I'm going to go forward. But what we've also got is another proxy, and he is known as a reverse. Now, if I've got my car and I've got it in drive if it's automatic, I'm going forwards. What happens when I put my car into reverse? My car goes backwards. So we're now going to look at the reverse proxy. And here we go over here. And this is the reverse proxy. So what the reverse proxy is doing, it's looking at out to in. So it's looking at the external users that are coming in. He's got two jobs. He's going to authenticate the person that's coming in. And the most important thing is he's going to decrypt the traffic. Because if the traffic's encrypted and it doesn't get decrypted, then none of your firewalls or your other devices will be able to analyze that traffic. So that's what your reverse proxy is doing. It's sometimes called an application proxy or a forward proxy. So here is my reverse proxy. And we're going to pretend that this is Zoom. And over here with Zoom, they've probably got room 1, room 2, and they've probably got, on a day, 50,000 rooms. Now, when you come to this session, you went through a URL, and that URL has got your authentication on it. So what happens here? The Zoom has actually said, yep, you can come and join in session. And then it looks to say, which room's it in? And I'm in room 1, so everybody from my class has come to room 1. You could also, if you're doing Zoom, put the room number and the password. I'll make the password easy, 123. And that's what your reverse proxy is doing. He's authenticating, he's going to authenticate people coming from the outside, and he's going to decrypt the traffic. So a lot of times, if you sign up for a thing like a podcast, that is what you're doing. You've been authenticated by the proxy, and you go into the right Zoom room. How's that, guys? So we've done proxy, reverse proxy. What we've got to look at now, I'm going to look at a thing called availability. And if you think about it, if I had British Airways website, in fact, let's change it American. Let's change it to Microsoft. If I've got the Microsoft website, how many people do you think would visit the Microsoft website in an hour? So they could never have one web server. What they have is very good. They have shared config. And then they have a web array. They might have something like 400 web servers. For us, with my space, we're going to have 3. This is Web 1. This is Web 2. And this is Web 3. The shared config pushes it out. One thing you need to know for this exam, these are identical hosts. So what could happen is I could go to the home page on this one. I could press a tab and it could put me on to this one from a tab. So what the load balancer is going to do, he's going to put you on the least utilized host. So let's put in our load balancing. So when you've got a load balancer, it does what it says in the tin. It balances the load. Now, this is not a Microsoft load balancer. This is something like an F5 or a Kemp. Most multinational corporations will have the F5. Here's a Ferrari. And here is a high volume of web traffic. And let's say this one's got 2 requests, this one's got 3 requests, and this one's got 1 request. My first request comes in for the purple person, and the load balancer puts them to the least utilized host. So that will go up to 2. And then later on, the next person's going to come in, and he's going to go to the next least utilized host. But let's say, for instance, Web3 crashes or is down for maintenance. Instead of my load balancing it over 3, he knows he's going to load balance the traffic over the 2 until the 1 comes back in. But what does a load balancer give you? And when you're looking at the Security Plus 701 exam, he gives you availability. So when you're visiting the Microsoft website, they might have 200 or 300 web servers working with 5 or 6 load balancers. And if they take some of them down for maintenance, the people will still get to the Microsoft web server. Also, because the load balancer is sending you to the least utilized host, then what's happening there you have a very fast experience and you don't realize you're jumping across these web servers. And that is the good thing about it. So what we'll do at the moment, we'll come out of here. I'll go through some slides, and then I'm going to go into the switch and how we protect access going to the switch. So let me just go through here and let's look at what we've got. The wide area network is untrusted. We've got a router. A router joins networks together. Then we've got a firewall to protect it. This is called the perimeter firewall. We could have an intrusion prevention system to protect the network. We could have a detection system to see new anomalies and patterns. We could have a jump server to get to areas in the network we don't want users getting to, and the administrator can get to there without a VPN. The proxy server is going to control the people going outside, because if you're corporate, you don't want people going in the corporate PC or even a government one, especially as government, and going to Instagram and going to social media sites. Reverse proxy, if you're going to hold some web meetings or Zoom meetings, your reverse proxy is going to control the people coming in. Remember, the proxy server, a URL filter stops you going to a URL, and a content filter stops you going to the target website that's got that content in. The load balancer balances a high volume of traffic, but he uses identical hosts. The only thing in here I've still got to do is switch, but let's go through some slides. The access control list, only the router or firewall uses it. Network appliance, the intrusion detection system, he detects anomalies on the network. He uses sensors and collectors, and he's got a thing called user behavior analytics. He knows what the patterns should be. Then we've got an intrusion prevention system. An intrusion prevention system, he protects your network. And when he's in inline mode, he's placed in front of the data path, so all the traffic is going through him. But please remember, if I get my IPS and I turn them into monitoring mode, he can do the same job as the IPS. Now, active devices that prevent attacks is the NIPS, and the passive one that observes but alerts is the NIDS. The jump server, he allows the administrator access to the network without VPN. If you're going to the exam, you're looking at somebody that's got a problem with an area on the network. You don't want the customers there, but you want your people there. You will then isolate that network and use a jump server to connect to it. Proxy server, he controls access to the internet. So a lot of corporates don't want people going to gambling sites and maybe social media sites from the corporate machine. He does the URL filter. He also caches the web pages. The load balancer controls access. No, there's a thing there. Sorry, I've got one slide that's a bit out of sync. I've got my load balancer, I've got my shared config, I've got my 4 web servers. I've got a high volume of incoming traffic. Which web server is a load balancer not going to send traffic to? Web 4's offline. It's going to balance between these 3. And remember, it provides availability. Now, I've still got to do something else. Let's go in and look at the switch. And we're only going to look at the aspect of the switch that's got to do with accessing the switch. Later on, as we go through the weeks, we'll go through other things the switch does. So on the switch, there's ports 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to invent a 6-port switch, even though there's not. So academically, I've got 6 ports on my switch. You'll normally have 12, 24, or 48. Now, what does the switch do? He actually connects internal users. So if I had a training room with maybe 8 seats on it, I would probably have a little switch in the corner of the training room and all the Ethernet cables would go there. Now, when I've got a PC, my PC would be plugged into the wall jack. The wall jack would go through the ceilings. It would get to a server room. And from the server room, it would actually come into something which is called a patch panel. So there's your patch panel. It's got no intelligence. And then from the patch panel, it would then go into the switch. But we're just going to circumvent all that today. And we're going to use a thing called 802.1x. And that is known as a managed switch. And what happens with a managed switch, it actually authenticates users and devices. Now, when I've got a desktop here that's PC1, if I want to take part on 802.1x, I need to put a certificate on the endpoint. So a lot of people would have maybe a smart card with a certificate on it. So that PC's got a certificate and he wants to connect to port 1. So he goes over here, plugs his Ethernet in, it's number 1. And what happens here, it connects to this port here. If the switch is a managed switch, it's a high-end switch, and it authenticates the user. And, oops, I'll go a little bit lighter than that. It's a bit dark green. I'll go for a light green instead. He gets a connection. Now, I've got a hacker over here, and his name is Big Bad Bob. Big Bad Bob decides to plug his Ethernet cable into the port next to him on the switch. What does Big Bad Bob not have on his desktop? Big Bad Bob does not have a certificate. So therefore, the switch blocks his traffic. And that's called an 802.1x managed switch. Now, we're going to do another method of controlling the switch, and it's called port security. So here we go. I'm going to go. So let's recap that. 802.1x, you need a certificate on the endpoint. That's where your exam will ask you. You need a certificate on the endpoint. And when I connect to that switch, the switch is looking at that certificate to authenticate me. Now, let's look at another scenario. I've got building 5. And building 5 is over here on my company's network. And building 5 is not going to be used for the next 6 months. So what happens here, we've got the switch for building 5. And here is the ports 1, 2, and 3. And here is the patch panel. And I've got a cable from my patch panel to ports 1, 2, and 3. Let's make the cable a different color. I've got cables to that patch panel. Now we're going to do port security. So the first type of port security, we're going to remove the patch panels. So if I go into the switch inside here and I remove the 3 patch panels, there's going to be nobody will be able to put the plug into the socket and get there. There's another method of port security. So let's go back in and we'll put the patch panels back in. Now, what I can use the switch software. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn the ports off. So although those ports are patched, I'm going to turn them off in the software so that if Big Bad Bob or somebody plugs into it, the port doesn't work at all. So you've got 2 methods of controlling switches. One is 802.1x, which is authenticating the user and device. The user must have a certificate on the endpoint. Or the second way is port security. With port security, I could turn the ports off in the switch software, blocking them, or I could remove the patch panels. How's that, ladies and gentlemen? So let's go back onto a few slides and see where we are and see what we've covered today. So we've looked at the network. The wide area network's untrusted. The boundary layer is called screen subnet, also a DMZ. The local area network is trusted, and that's called the LAN. So if I was putting my domain controllers and SQL servers on, they would be in the LAN. And then we've got a perimeter firewall, which stops the traffic coming through. And we've got an internal firewall that's protecting the LAN. So if an attacker wants to come in and get into my domain controller, he's got to get past 2 separate firewalls. How's that? So let's go have a look at a couple of questions I've got for you. Question number 1. A large corporation is setting up a web array. It consists of 8 web servers to sell goods on its e-commerce website. It has been decided that we'll purchase F5 load balancers so the web traffic can be optimized for speedy customer delivery, also availability. Which of the following best describes why the load balancer is useful? Now, sometimes if they ask you for best or most, there can be more than one correct answer. Have a look at that and put in the chat what do you think the answer is to this question here. So you'll find the chat is available there. What do you think the answer is? Do you think it will only ensure authorized users can gain access to the network? I think that sounds like a reverse proxy. Do you think it will provide redundancy for data storage? That's geographical dispersal. Do you think it will monitor user activity? No. Or do you think it will evenly distribute network traffic to prevent bottlenecks? And there you go. That's what your load balancer is. It's also providing availability. Let's look at the next one. A cybersecurity firm needs a solution to the secure management and monitoring of its client-sensitive systems that will minimize the exposure of client networks to potential threats. So our firm is monitoring the client's networks, but we don't want to expose them to potential threats. What network security approach should you adopt? Are you going to implement a reverse proxy? Are you going to put a jump server in? Are you going to use IPsec? Are you going to enforce 802.1x? What do you fancy, Jeffrey? We want to minimize the exposure of the client networks, but I need to go in and do some admin work. So I'm going to deploy a jump server so that only the administrator can get into the client network and nobody else can. And that will stop the external threats. The next one. A multinational corporation wants to enhance security and privacy for its employers' internal usage. They also aim to optimize bandwidth utilization. Where should they place the proxy servers to achieve this goal? Are they going to put the proxy inside the LAN? Are they going to put it in front of the hosting company's public website? Are they going to put it between the firewall and the external routers? Or are they going to put it in the edge of the screen subnet between the internet and internal network? What do you think, Linda? What do you think is the best option there?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's going to be C. Because you're going to put a proxy in the DMZ and you're going to monitor all the traffic leaving. Then what we've got, a large enterprise hosts critical web applications internally and wants to ensure the security. They've considered the use of using a reverse proxy. In what way can this enhance the security of the web applications? Now I'm hosting the web applications internally. Why am I using a reverse proxy?
Because you want to look at outside users coming in?
Correct. So what's going to be my answer?
See?
We're going to provide a secure gateway for internal users. But remember, one of the main things about a reverse proxy, it decrypts the incoming traffic. And then my firewalls and my IDS and my IPS, they can monitor that traffic. So this session I've just done at the moment has actually gone fairly quickly. This is an extract from chapter 11 from my book. Amazon put the book on a 20% discount to 7 November. 7 November's gone, and it's still there. Also, if you look on LinkedIn, I've got an exam voucher giveaway for November. It's published on LinkedIn, and it's going to be a draw, and I'm going to announce the winner on Sunday, 1st of December. So my name is Ian Neal. Thank you for joining me tonight. Now what we've got to do is work out what do we want to do next week. So who's actually studying for Security Plus? I know that Jeffrey's doing it and Linda's doing it. Kathy, are you studying for Security Plus at the moment?
Yes, I am.
Which areas do you struggle with? Or have you not?
For sure. Cloud security, infrastructure, architecture.
Sorry?
Infrastructure, architecture. Is that the correct term?
That's what we've been doing tonight. Some of the security infrastructure architecture. So we'll have a think about this. I think what I'll do, I'll post onto LinkedIn about next Saturday. And if people have got, instead of maybe like the whole of Domain 5 and that, if they've got specific parts of the syllabus they're not sure about, I will then do it as a question and answer session next week, and I'll teach those topics. How does that sound? So my name is Ian Neal. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Ian.
You're welcome. How did this